those crude and rude oil prices. The rude prices at the pumps have Americans taking to mass transit. In 2007, Americans took 10.3 billion trips on public transit, the highest level of mass transit ridership in 50 years. This year, cities are seeing mass transit increases between 7 and 20% already. Here to talk about gas versus mass is Elliott Sander. He's the Executive Director and CEO of Metropolitan Transit Authority, and Representative Scott Garrett of New Jersey, who has been an advocate of a bill to return responsibility for transportation programs back to the states. Gentlemen, good morning, and thanks for joining me.
Good morning. Good morning.
Elliot, just put this in context for us, some of the statistics that I just talked about. You run what is arguably the busiest transportation system in the country. What are you seeing?
Well, we're seeing, very, very large increases in ridership. In the first 3 months, we've seen increases of 5% on our commuter rail lines. We've seen an increase in our subway ridership. We're also seeing that nationally. Our colleagues in the rest of the country, some transit properties have seen increases of 30%, some 10%. So there's no question that something's going on here, which we think is primarily related, not completely, but primarily related to the increase in gas prices.
And as I understand it, Elliot, if you look at most of the transportation authorities across the country, in essence, about a third of the ticket sales can be used toward reinvesting in the transportation infrastructure, but there could potentially be a larger shortfall. Talk to me about it because of tax receipts and things of that nature. Are you prepared to handle this growing traffic, and if it continues to grow?
Well, there's no question from our vantage point, and I think the vantage point of most who've looked at this field, that we need to invest substantially in transit, our transportation infrastructure. The House Transportation Infrastructure Committee, they've taken that position. There are a number of national commissions that have looked at this, and we've underinvested in our transportation infrastructure in the last 10, 20 years, and there needs to be a significant increase in that investment. If that investment is made in transit, where appropriate, on the highway side, also airports, then we can handle the people. But I think you see in the airports and also in transit where if you don't make that investment, we have large levels of overcrowding.
All right, perfect segue. Representative Garrett, tell me about those costs and infrastructure and build out. How important is it to you right now to make sure that we make those investments so we can handle the traffic?
Well, considering that I just rushed here to get here, and I come from a part of New Jersey where we have absolutely no mass transit, actually, and I could have used some mass transit to get here. It is vitally important that we do it, and especially where we are right now in the metropolitan area, New York, New Jersey, Connecticut, where people are so closely together. Mass transit here works probably better than most other parts in the country, and that's why places like this should have the decision-making power in our own hands to be able to decide where those dollars go to, so we can funnel it into mass transit so people can decide that they want to live a little bit outside the city, but still take a bus, take a train to get into and be there. So it's critical that we do this. Unfortunately, Washington has not always been exactly on the same page when it comes to supporting mass transit. Washington has not always been there with the dollars to return it, and that's what something I'd like to see changed.
All right, so Representative, explain this to us right now, for those of us who don't understand how those dollars are allocated. How are they allocated right now, and how would you like that specifically to change? Because there's been a lot of talk right now, given what's happened in the credit markets, that the municipalities and the individual states are having a tougher time funding the dollars that they need. So what would you like to see change?
Well, the money for the transit and for all of our transportation needs comes from two places, from the states and from the federal government. The states, of course, have a lot more prerogative as to where they spend their dollars. The federal government, we set down the rules on where the dollars go to. That's what I'd like to see change. Right now, when you go to the gas station, you pay 18 cents or so in federal gasoline taxes. That goes to Washington. The bureaucrats and the legislators down there spend the money as we see fit, maybe not necessarily as the folks back at home would see fit. I would like to give a lot more deference to the people back at home in those decision makings, and how you do that is simply this: allow a state like New Jersey, like New York, to say, we want to opt out of the rulemaking procedures down in Washington. We want to take control of our own lives, our own destinies with regard to our decision making. And I bet you anything, the folks in this neck of the woods say a lot more of those dollars would then therefore end up in the mass transit area, because we know how important it is. So the state should be able to have the opportunity to opt out of that system, keep our own dollars here, stop sending it to D.C. in the first place, and allow us to be the driving force as to where the dollars go.
Elliot, what's your thought on that, and can it work that way?
Respectfully disagree with the Congressman. In the context of global warming, in the context of increasing levels of congestion, in the context of the energy crisis, not having a federal role, a guiding role, is something that would give the transit community concern. Certainly appreciate what the Congressman is saying in terms of local decision making, and a lot of local decision making now, given the federal law of 1991 Ice-T, is pushed down to the metropolitan areas. But to completely take the federal government out of it, given the kind of crisis that we think we're facing in terms of congestion, in terms of the need to have more folks on transit, given, again, energy, environment, and so forth, taking Washington out of the picture in terms of having a little bit of a guiding hand, gives the folks in transit some concern. All
right, so Elliot, how do you solve what you deem in essence is a crisis in congestion, and do we need to raise more funds?
Well, I think there's almost a consensus now that we need to raise more funds. If you speak to Secretary Peters, our USDOT Secretary, other folks, I think there's a recognition there's more money. There's a debate about how much should be private sector, public sector, but there's a consensus about that, and that's what we need to do.
All right. Well, Elliot Sander, Congressman Garrett, thank you so much for joining us. I know it's a continued debate, and I look forward to having you guys back on again to talk about it in the near future.
Thanks a lot.
All right. Well.